Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh, as promised. I'm joined by Patrick McGee. He is the author of this brand new book, Apple in China, the capture of the world's greatest company, and fascinating it is indeed. Hello, Patrick. How are you?
I'm good, Hugh. What is it? Morning Grace. I haven't. It's Morning Glory, Evening Grace. It's been a while,
Morning
but
glory, evening
yeah.
grace. Well done. I want to begin with page 360 of Apple in China, where you reference what might be the worst 45 seconds in Tim Cook's life. Let's play that for the audience so they can see what you're talking about there. And these 45 seconds
the
were
Chinese
filmed
people's
originally
right
by
to
Fox
protest?
News. Go ahead, Harley, and run with that tape while I talk to Patrick. And that's Vaughn.
Protesting COVID
Hillary Vaughn, yep.
lockdowns. Do you regret restricting airdrop access that protesters used to evade surveillance from the Chinese government? Do you think it's problematic to do business with the Communist Chinese Party when they suppress human rights?
Well, these are all legitimate questions, Patrick. Did he ever get around to answering them?
No, never. And, I had conversations with Apple's PR team at the time, and they said, well, look, you can't doorstop a CEO and expect them just to answer on the spot. And I said, okay, fair enough. What are the answers? And they still wouldn't answer them. So that sort of tells you everything. I mean, this is the CEO of what I call the world's greatest company, and he's unable to answer pretty basic questions. I mean, certainly questions that any American would take for granted, right? In terms of like basic human rights and being able to protest and things like that. And it's just a really revealing episode of how tied or bound to Beijing's fate the world's greatest company has become. And so it's a really revealing episode.
Patrick, I normally don't do books about corporations. And that's because it's hard for you, the author, to keep up with events that are happening. Like today, there's a deal between China and the United States, which will no doubt have a great deal of impact on Apple, and so books are overtaken. But I don't think yours will be, because there's a fundamental issue here that doesn't really go to whether or not the trade deal is good for Apple or bad for Apple. It's whether or not we want our biggest company, our most innovative company, perhaps the paradigmatic company for America, to be that deeply intertwined with China. Isn't that the bottom issue?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, most corporate histories don't have geopolitical consequences. This one does. The other thing is that, at least in my publicist's eyes, the book itself is going to be a news event, because I think I'm really uncovering, just what a political player Apple has been. Because, what people confuse is they think Apple just does these great designs and that capable factories in China know what to do. They take the orders and they build them. That's not the case at all. Apple has been sending for a quarter century America's top engineers by the literal plane load to build those capacities in China. And it's the only place it's been building those capacities. So Apple isn't just dependent on expertise that it found in China. It's become dependent on expertise it created in China.
Now, last week I talked to both the President of the United States and the Vice President. China came up in both of them. And the problem with China is a problem that everyone of my generation inherited. We fell for the Deng Xiaoping, hide your strength and move forward. In the meantime, Xi Jinping is not at all shy about his strength. But we thought actually China would evolve. China did not evolve. They simply captured the WTO. Did they also capture China in that process? Apple in that process?
Yeah, the subtitle of the book is The Capture of the Greatest Company. So absolutely they did. Yeah, I mean, the only maybe distinction I make versus some revisionist authors writing today is I think we're not sympathetic to the view that was taking place in the late 1990s and early 2000s. I don't view people that had that narrative as acting in bad faith. Some people now say, oh, it was just Western capitalists out for greed or something. I think there really was an American consensus and an evidence-based consensus. If you look at, say, Taiwan, right, which was under martial law for decades and then became a thriving democracy. And I think a reason they did is because they did build a middle class. They were instrumental in building things like the IBM PC and the whole PC boom in the 80s and 90s, where commerce doesn't cross borders, armies do. That was the mentality. And we sort of built this, interdependent worlds that we call Pax Americana, and it worked out really well. The arrogant decision that was erroneous in retrospect, but I think worthy of, just like it was a merit-based argument at the time, was that we could do for China what we did for Taiwan. That clearly proved to be wrong. And it's unclear if China was ever going to go in the direction of democracy.
It's what we also did for South Korea, that we did for post-war Europe, that we did wherever we intertwined capitalism. Capitalism won, but not in China. I'll be right back with Patrick McGee. Right. His brand new book, Apple in China, fascinating reading. We're going to look at very quickly at the future in segment next, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio North. I'm joined by Patrick McGee, the author of this book, Apple in China, to capture the world's greatest company. And in 9 minutes, Patrick, I want to cover 8 things, so it's going to be kind of rushed. Number one, the India fallback strategy. Is it working? Is Apple able to build a parallel company in India in the event that everything goes to hell with China?
If that's how you define it, it's absolutely not working. If you are defining it as avoiding tariffs slapped on China, then it is working. And I think that's the only attempt that they're making right now. If you're looking for a bifurcated supply chain that's taking place in India, Apple is not doing that. Apple should be doing that, although it risks the ire of Beijing if they do. But if it takes 1,000 steps to build an iPhone, the final step is now in India. Hooray, you've avoided tariffs. You haven't done a thing to de-risk from China.
All right, and then that's a bad thing. Number two, TSCM vulnerability, which I found fascinating. Not just vulnerability to invasion, but also vulnerability to earthquake and seismic events, which are inevitable, though not predictable. Tell me a little bit about how they de-risk the TSMC vulnerability.
Well, at least there are steps being made there by building in Arizona, but that too is a little more hype than it is substance, or at least if it's substance, it's going to take a long time, right? Chris Miller, author of Trip War, is fond of saying that fabricating semiconductors is the most complex thing that humans have ever done. And so the idea that we're just going to move that from Taiwan in a matter of, months or years to Arizona is kind of fanciful, but I'm a big supporter of the CHIPS Act. I really do think it needs to be done. I mean, it's just deeply irresponsible. I quote someone in the book saying it's borderline malpractice for Apple to have basically all CPUs from everything from AirPods to Mac Pros, and certainly including iPhones, all built on a single island, and especially when that island is considered a rogue province of our biggest adversary.
And on a seismic fault that will eventually go. Okay, next, Huawei. During the first Trump administration, the president, Secretary Pompeo, Keith Krach, everybody turned Huawei into a leper. Are they still a leper?
No, they're more threatening now than they were before. So Huawei during Trump 1.0 was dependent upon Google for the operating system, right? They ran Android, and dependent on companies like Qualcomm to run 5G infrastructure. By kneecapping them, by taking them out of the game because they couldn't use those Western companies, they went into super aggressive 16-hour workday mode for 4 years. And now they've built their own operating system called Harmony OS, right? So you think about it, there's iOS versus Android. Now there's Harmony OS. If I was to make a speculative leap, I would say that by 2030, Harmony OS is the operating system for every smartphone in China. And
wow.
That's a major threat. So I think that really came back to bite us.
All right, next, de-risking the customer loyalty handcuffs to the Chinese consumer base. I don't know how they ever get away from that. I really don't, because the way you've described it in Apple in China, they need Chinese customers to survive.
Apple has about $70 billion of revenue in China. That isn't just bigger than any other Western company. It's more profitable than any Chinese company. And it's more revenue than major industries. I mean, $70 billion is enormous. And so, yes, they absolutely, if they were to do big moves in India, not only do they risk the ire of Beijing, who could, cut off electricity at a couple factories to make their point, they also risk a backlash from Chinese consumers who rightfully see the iPhone as an indigenous product. But if Apple becomes the poster child of decoupling from China, the backlash would be swift.
Now, let me talk about a good bit of news. I love the fact that their services division is, I love Apple TV. I love watching Slow Horses. I think they do great quality production. Can they diversify fast enough to escape their China trap, which I think is actually inescapable on the tech side?
Can they diversify? But you're asking about services rather than supply chain?
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I think services, nobody thinks of services as decoupling from China. And yet I think the decoupling in terms of investments in India is so inconsequential that the fact that Apple gets, a fifth of its profit from Google just being the default search engine on Safari, I think that has diversified Apple's balance sheet more than anything they've done to de-risk from China. So it's true that if things in China blew up, let's say, and you really couldn't buy a new iPhone for 2 or 3 years, I mean, at least they're getting billions upon billions in services, but I don't think that's enough to solve what I think of as an existential problem for the company.
Yeah, I think we're getting to the same answer, but I'm going to try with, how about the AI initiative? Can AI free, because I view Apple as a China addict after reading Apple in China. They are addicted to China. How do you get an addict off?
Sure.
You give them some different way to be addicted. Maybe they can become addicted to non-China dependent AI. Is that possible?
AI is really interesting. So on the one hand, Apple is not leading the AI race at all. On the other hand, they don't necessarily need to for two reasons. One, when I use ChatGPT, I'm using it through the iPhone. So insofar as I subscribe to ChatGPT, Apple is actually still making revenue there. Secondly, even if Apple's late to the AI game, Siri has access to everything on my phone in a way that ChatGPT never will. For privacy reasons,
true.
ChatGPT will never be able to go through my calendar, go through my email, and make the connections in an intelligent manner. Siri is allowed to do that, and it will always have a monopoly there, and Apple sort of has a legal right to do that because it's its operating system. On the other hand, AI is problematic because ChatGPT is illegal in China. And so Apple has yet to find a major partner to have AI services that, frankly, all the Chinese operators have, right? They're working with Alibaba, they're working with Baidu, and you almost have a joint venture relationship if Apple's going to do that in China. Meanwhile, it doesn't matter if I'm in America. If I ask Siri what happened on Tiananmen Square in 1989, I mean, it either won't tell me or it will cite somebody else, right? It'll tell me to go to Google or something. But Siri cannot answer those questions because it's politically taboo. It doesn't matter that I'm in America.
So, Patrick, I want to sum it up this way. I really want to get an investor's perspective from you. For many, many years, I owned a lot of Apple, and then I realized they have a China problem. I got out because I want Jimmy Lai out of jail, and I think Xi Jinping is a ruthless tyrant. So I don't want to really be heavily invested in people who are heavily invested with him. They can't ever not be, as your subtitle says, captive to China, can they?
At best, they could bifurcate the supply chain and have something in India 15 years from now that has replicated the China strategy. But they're not going to exit China in order to do that because they would be giving up a $70 billion business, per year. So that's nonsensical. But I wish I was more optimistic about India's capacity or capabilities or even motivation to do it. India just doesn't have the same sort of political wherewithal to push manufacturing as the be-all, end-all. Beijing has been a once-in-a-century partner that Apple's going to find a really difficult time trying to replicate anywhere else.
Patrick, let me ask you one more question. Stand by. I'll be right back, America. I'll close the program with Patrick McGee, authoring Apple in China, with one more question. Stay tuned. Patrick McGee is my guest as I wrap up today's Hugh Hewitt Show. Apple in China is his brand new book. So the question I didn't get to ask you, do you own the stock, and would you buy the stock given the perils of the world that we have, even with the announcement from President Trump today about progress with China on trade?
So I won't evade your question, but let me just first say that as a journalist, I certainly am not going to trade in the stock, buying or selling or shorting a company that I directly follow. I only invest in index funds, so it's just in the S&P 500. So in that sense, it's probably my biggest holding because I invest in the S&P 500.
Yes.
But I'm certainly not trading the stock. So let's just be very clear about that. I don't sort of direct the portfolio in any way. As to whether one should buy the Apple stock, I mean, the problem with quantifying a risk here is, I quote someone at the end of the book saying Apple's relationship with China could blow up any day. Will it blow up? Does it have to blow up? What day will it blow up? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think you can quantify that. But in a sense, I'm less interested in that, or at least what I bring to the table here is that China got where it was because Apple's DNA is all over Shenzhen, Chengdu, and Zhengzhou, and Suzhou. So the narrative that I'm really building here is that the US-China tech battle is the most consequential thing happening geopolitically for hegemony in the 21st century. And my book is the disquieting message that America's greatest company is playing for the other side.
That is exactly what I came away from. And I'm very glad I divested from Apple 5 years ago. And like you, I've got index funds, but I wish some index funds would begin to consider exiting Apple because I don't think they can exit China. Patrick McGee, great book, Apple in China.
Thank you so much.
The Capture of the World's Greatest Company. Thank you for the effort you put into this. Thank you for your time with me today.